The doctors delivered the near-lifeless child to his father, leaving him in the forest to die. The defendant couldn't believe his eyes. Alfred was outside the hospital as his sick and dying son was taken inside to receive medical care. He stared at the scene and could not bring himself to believe his son would now be a huge burden on his shoulders. The doctor's voice interrupted his own thoughts as he began focusing on the outside world. Alfred looked at the doctor without being able to understand what he was saying. The doctor seemed to move his lips in silence for Alfred. He tried to understand what he wanted to convey, but he couldn't. So the doctor stared into his eyes. He had understood that this man had not heard a single word he had said. Therefore, he says to him, "Sir, can you hear me or not?" Managing to capture Alfred's attention, he continues, "Well, look, we've done everything in our power. The truth is that your son is dying. It's best that he spends his last days at home with you who loves him," said the doctor. He paused and continued, "You'll just have to be there for the boy. That's all he needs. It's your company, and who knows, maybe God will have mercy on your son, and I made it through this. I recommend that you don't hire a live-in nurse. I estimate your son only has a couple of weeks to live." The doctor left, and only the smell of medicines hung in the air like a disembodied spirit. Alfred can't believe what's happening. He directs his gaze towards the ambulance where they were waiting for him. From that moment on, for Alfred, everything happened as if it were a bad dream. The man watched as the ambulance stopped at his house as orderlies carried his dying son into the apartment. They left him on his bed and simply walked away. A few hours had already passed since they'd left his dying child there in his house. Alfred still couldn't assimilate what was happening. Suddenly, he heard a weak voice from his son's room. "Bubba, please come here, please." His little son begged him. He approached the room. When his child sees with what little strength he has left, he tells him, "Hey, thanks for taking care of me." Saying this, he coughed heavily. It was a wet, wheezing cough. Alfred put his hands to his ears, not wanting to hear those whispers from his weak son. Then he slumped down into the living room chair. He wanted to make some kind of sound, but the voice didn't come out. He decided to leave the room and lay down to sleep on the sofa. Being there, he thought about what he was going to do. He wanted his son not to survive the night. He sure succumbs to his illness and will get him dead in the morning. But his macabre wishes just didn't come true. Alfred woke up an hour before the alarm went off. He makes himself a coffee and entered the room hoping to find the child dead. But this one was only asleep, still breathing. This infuriates him so much that he had to stop himself from shouting in rage. He was shaking with fury. He went back to the kitchen and smashed the mug against the wall. The brown liquid splattered on the sturdy tiles that showed not a single scratch. That cruel father exhaled heavily and began to cry. He sat on the sofa and cried bitterly from helplessness and despair. Those tears of frustration fell silently down his cheeks. Alfred had imagined that when he arrived with his son at the hospital, he would never come out alive. He had the illusion of thus being able to start a new life. He was already tired of having to take care of his little son, who survived after the accident where his wife died and the child. But since then, he lived very sick and had become a very big burden on that unscrupulous man. While he was still so immersed in his own thoughts, trembling with resentment, helplessness, and anger, the doorbell rang. Yes, that waking from his slumber, he ran to the door and flung it open. "Why did you take so long?" He claimed a beautiful young woman who'd been at the door for a while. She was outraged. This would be 2 large cups of coffee to go. "Lower your voice," the man told her, putting his finger over his mouth. He looked around somewhat disturbed. He didn't want his son to know that this young woman was there. His young lover did not give importance to the matter. She just grimaced and prepared to enter the apartment. Days ago, she had moved to live there while Alfred's son fought for his life alone in the hospital. The girl entered the kitchen and Alfred, annoyed, complained to her, "What are you doing?" "What?" The young woman replies, "You said yourself that he was very sick, that he was dying, so he wasn't going to get up." She said, in the man's ear, in a soft whisper, snuggling up against his body. She kissed him passionately, and he didn't put up any kind of resistance. When he separated from her, it was his son's bedroom. Meanwhile, the girl went into the shower where he would later go with her. Alfred brought his son a glass of water. He gave him the pills that were its turn and went to the shower to continue having fun with his lover. While there, they asked for a plan to get rid of that little boy. It was all with the goal that he would soon be left alone with this beautiful young lady, and that he could go back to doing whatever he wanted. His wife, who had left all her property to only her son, and she was not poor at all. Because she worked hard and thanks to her work, she left a large sum of money and property to her small child. So if the child died, everything would go to Alfred's name, who would not have to work again. He and his lover would live alone in comfort. Alfred began to collect the child's things in a suitcase and put them in the car. Then he spread out the back seat of it, covered with a thick blanket, and went looking for his son, who literally beamed with happiness when he saw him. Without imagining what his father had planned, in his mind, the man tells his son, "I know someone who can help you. If modern medicine can't, I'll take you to see a shaman. He'll help you in this way." He lied to his little son as he left. He tried to illuminate the dull, nearly colorless eyes of his son. He took him in his arms and carried him to the car. The little one weighed almost nothing. He felt like he was just skin and bones. Alfred felt repulsed by the smell of the medicines that had soaked into his skin. He put him in the back seat, covered him with a blanket, and drove in the car for more than 4 hours until they reached a deep forest. At first, he wanted to leave him in the thick of that forest, but something called his attention there. He saw there an old abandoned cabin. Perhaps it belonged to a ranger or some local hermit. So he took his son in his arms and took him to the abandoned house. He laid him down on a big bed and left without saying a word. In those moments, the little boy understood that his father was leaving him to abandon him in that old cabin. He understood that this one was not coming back. Helplessly, he laid down on the bed, and tears of despair flowed from his eyes. He understood that he would die of starvation alone and abandoned. He just listened as the engine started and the car just drove off. The young man could only cry. He had no strength to move, not even to move his hands, not even to get up. He was thirsty and his whole body ached. Besides, he needed to go to the bathroom, but no one could help him without strength, and destroyed from crying so much, the boy fell into a deep sleep. But when he woke up, he realized that he wasn't home alone. He listened when someone told him, "Drink some water, drink this, it'll make you feel much better," said the voice of a man whose face he saw blurred. The young man obeyed and drank a few sips, but he couldn't drink anymore. Then the man raised his head with his big hands and helped him finish the potion. Immediately he felt that he fell asleep again. Sometime later, he woke up. There he got a good look at the bearded man. The latter, who was attending to him, approached him and smiling and said, "Good morning. You've finally woken up. I've always said that nature heals everything, but I really came to think that you would never survive this." At this moment, the child felt great. Yeah, he felt great. He wasn't in pain. Everything was clear in his eyes. He even felt that he could breathe normally. With strength, he says to the man who was taking care of him, "Thank you, sir. I thought I would die after my father brought me here. He wanted me to die here alone. The man tells him, "My name's Arthur, son. Don't be afraid. You're not going to die. I promise you. The options you have worked very well. They've been taking care of you for 2 months. At first, I doubted that you would make it, but you clung to life as best you could. You won't fall into that oblivion anymore. You'll be up in a couple of weeks. I'm sure you'll recover. My dog's been sleeping up in here with you the whole time. His name's Farrell. He fell asleep taking care of you when I went into the woods, and he added your father is a despicable being child. Children are blessings regardless of their condition." The curious young man asks, "Excuse me, but why do you live alone in this forest?" The man replied, "I'm just a bum. I lost my job. The bank took my apartment away from me, and I had nothing left to do but beg on the streets when I met Farrell. And then one day I went into the woods and found this house. I made friends with those who live around, who gave me food and things in exchange for doing various jobs. That's how I settled here, and I've been here for 2 years now." After several weeks of recovery, the young man one day decided it was time to go. He had to go back to the city and make his father pay for everything he'd done to him. But he knew he couldn't alone, at least because he was still very young. He was 16 years old. Therefore, he asked that good man to go with him. Arthur, delighted to continue helping, that young man agreed to go. The first thing Albert did was go to his mother's lawyer, who knew that all of his inheritance belonged to him. The lawyer, surprised to see him still alive, tells the young man that his father declared him dead, and that if he had only arrived a few days later, he would have kept anything. Albert tells the lawyer the whole truth as he prepares everything for the young man to appear in court on the day his father would receive approval to keep his son's inheritance. Yes, of that son he considered dead. The day of the judgment arrived, and everything seemed to be going well for Alfred. But suddenly the family lawyer tells the judge and everyone present that there's someone who must appear in court before sentencing. Everyone was completely surprised to see that the one who entered the room was Albert, Alfred's supposedly dead son. He enters, accompanied by Arthur, the man who saved his life. To the astonishment of everyone present, the lawyer explains to the judge that Albert was abandoned by his father in a forest on the outskirts of the city, days after he left the hospital. The man's intention, of course, was to leave his son to die there. Thanks to Arthur, the man who accompanied Albert, he managed to recover, and he's here today, demanding that justice be done for him. Faced with that allegation, and after listening to the testimony of Albert and Arthur, the judge asks Alfred, "How do you declare yourself before these accusations?" But Alfred, who's still astonished to see that the dying child he had left behind was in front of him, safe and sound, and also condemning him for what he had done. The cruel father, almost without strength from the decompression, tells the judge that he is innocent, that he had taken him there because he knew that that man would cure him. Trying to get closer to his son, he says, "My boy, I knew you'd be okay." But Arthur, a tall and well-built man, stood between Alfred and the young man. Staring at the man, he said, "You really are the worst human being I've ever met. Or did you dare to leave your own dying son alone in the woods just to keep his money?" Alfred was petrified before the imposing figure of that man who defended Albert, and the officers had to intervene, since Arthur was very upset and wanted to give him a good beating. After all, the judge found Alfred guilty on charges of attempted murder and illegal appropriation of property. He was simply sentenced to 30 years in jail. Well, Albert asked Arthur to stay and live with him, that he no longer had a family, and he would get him a good job at a company where his mother worked. This, of course, he accepted and eventually became manager of that company. He met a hardworking and caring woman, who he married and had Albert with. The couple was happy to finally have a family again.